Hey friends, I hope your week is off to a great start. Today I'm going to be testing out Rick Martinez's recipe for Ancho Mole Cookies from the December issue of Bon Appetit. Over the past couple weeks you've seen me test out 5 other cookie recipes from this month's magazine, so today is the 6th and final cookie. I'm really looking forward to this one because I'm a big fan of desserts that combine savory with sweet, so this cookie is right up my alley. I do these Bon Appetit recipe tests every single Wednesday, so if you like this one, please be sure to give me a big thumbs up and click subscribe. Without any further ado, let's get into this recipe. So the first thing we're going to need to do is toast up our nuts. So here I've got some raw walnuts and I'm adding to that raw sesame seeds. You want to make sure to buy raw for both of these because since we're toasting them, if they're already toasted, we're going to end up burning the nuts. And I'm going to pop this in the oven for 8 to 10 minutes, tossing halfway. Alright, so these nuts were in the oven toasting for exactly 10 minutes, and you can see they picked up a little bit of color. So I'm going to set these aside and let them cool down to room temperature until we're ready for that. So this recipe calls for ancho powder, not ancho chili powder, just powdered ancho chilies. And I couldn't find that. I went to several different grocery stores. So what I've got here is just whole dried ancho chilies, and I'm going to cut them up, pop them in a spice mill, and make my own chili powder. I'm going to work in a couple batches to avoid crowding the spice mill, and so I'm just going to pulse this until it looks like a fine powder. Alright, and I think that looks like a pretty nice powder, so it looks pretty uniformly ground. So our homemade ancho powder looks great, and so to that I'm going to stream in some agave nectar, and we're just going to stir this to get it combined. And now we can set this aside until we're ready for it. Now we're ready to assemble the dough. So this process sounds pretty straightforward. In the bowl of my stand mixer, I'm going to add a stick and a half of room temperature butter, and to that, some granulated sugar. And then using my scraper beater attachment, I'm just going to cream this for about 3 minutes until it's light and fluffy. So with our butter and sugar mixture looking nice and fluffy, we can go ahead and add in a full tablespoon of vanilla extract, along with 3 large egg yolks. And we're going to mix this just for about a minute until there are no streaks of yolk remaining. So that looks nice and evenly incorporated, so now we can scrape in our prepared ancho chili mixture. And we'll cream this mixture for just about a minute until it's fully incorporated. Alright, and this looks super fluffy. The color on this is really cool. It's kind of a bright, vibrant orange color. Looks like it's going to be spicy and very flavorful, so I'm excited about how this is shaping up. It's got a nice smell so far too. With the wet ingredients fully incorporated, I've got all of my dry ingredients here, and we can go ahead and whisk these together. And then I'm going to dump these in all at once. Then on very low speed, we're going to mix just to combine. Perfect, so the dough is fully incorporated and now it's ready for all the mix-ins. This cookie's got tons of goodies that are mixed into the dough. So first we've got our nuts and seeds that we toasted previously. These have cooled down. To that, I'm adding some dark chocolate wafers. Last, I've got dried mango, pineapple, and papaya. So I need to cut these into 3/4 inch pieces. And the pineapple's probably pretty close to the right size. I'm just gonna cut these in half to make them a little bit more manageable. And then my papaya. And I'm using all 3 dried fruit that the recipe recommended. However, if you want to use only one of these, you can certainly do that. And then we're just going to mix this all together using a wooden spoon or a rubber spatula just to get it all evenly incorporated. So you can see that this is a ton of good stuff added into the dough. This is really my kind of cookie where it's half dough, half other stuff. This is really going to be a treat. Beautiful, and this looks nice and evenly incorporated. So I'm going to divide this dough evenly between 2 pieces of cling film, and we'll get this into the freezer. And so you want to get this as close to being an even cylinder as you can. You don't want to have kind of a scraggly end bit. So if you start to get an end that's a little thin, just kind of bang it back in and flatten it out, and then re-roll it. I'm looking for 10 inches. I'm at 9 right now. You want to kind of squeeze the dough together as you roll it, just to make sure that there aren't any gaps in the middle of your cookie. We're going to end up slicing this cookie, and if you've got pockets of air inside of it, you're going to have a lot of crumbling going on. So do yourself a favor and get that dough packed in tightly. So I've got my 2 10-inch logs of cookie dough. I'm going to pop this into the freezer for about 20 minutes, just until the surface of the cookie dough log is firm. So our dough's been chilling for about 20 minutes, so it is firm to the touch on the outside. It kind of feels like Play-Doh. It's got a little bit of pushback and resistance to it. So now we're going to shape this into the triangle form. So the recipe says to slap it against your counter to make a flat side. I'm going to turn it basically 1/3 of the way around. I'm trying to get a point along the top. So I'm going to go at an angle here, I said if you need to, you can reshape it with your hands a little bit. So this is triangle number 1. I do think it works best to actually throw it against the counter, so that's what I'm doing this time. It is a little tricky to get this to land on 3 sides. It really wants to kind of turn itself into a square. So if you're having trouble throwing it, you can always just kind of push it with your hands and just rotate the log around until you get to basically like an equilateral triangle. And then I'm going to pop this back in the freezer for another 15 minutes just to let it firm up a bit more. All right, so these cookie dough logs have been in the freezer for another 15 minutes. So working 1 log at a time, I'm going to take some of that egg white that we saved earlier and just brush this on the outside of one of the cookie dough logs. The egg white is going to hold all of the sesame seeds onto the surface. So you want to make sure that you get a really thorough application here. Okay, so I think that's a nice even coating of egg white. So we can lift this up and drop it onto our bed of sesame seeds. If you have any spots where the seeds haven't stuck, you can just go ahead and sprinkle them over the top. Give it a little pat to help them stick on there. And you are looking for full coverage of sesame seeds on the outside, so really press them on there if they're not sticking. I think the edges are probably the most difficult spot to make sure you're getting an even coating there. So just turn it up and make sure that it looks good. I'm going to pop this back into the freezer for about an hour. I don't need to have it completely frozen solid, but I do need it to be firm enough that I can slice it without it totally getting misshapen. So this cookie dough was chilling in the freezer for a little over an hour and we are ready to slice it. So we want to cut these into 1/4 inch wide cookies. And so far this is going pretty well. I was expecting to have some resistance as I hit the chocolate or the nuts, but the knife is really kind of just gliding through pretty effortlessly. I'm really liking the cross-section of these cookies. There's a lot going on inside. You can see the different fruits, you can see the nuts. It's looking really, really impressive so far. And overall, the triangle shape is holding up really well during the slicing too. And the dough is soft enough that even though it's frozen, if you have a piece that's kind of round, I'm just able to smush it into a triangle and that looks a little bit nicer. So if you have some pieces that you don't love how they look, you can just be a little bit creative and smush them into the shape you want. So I'm going to bake both trays of cookies at the same time for about 10 minutes until they're fully cooked. So halfway through I'm going to rotate from top to bottom and front to back. So we'll see how these look when they're done. So the cookies have cooled on their baking trays for a little over an hour, so they are down to room temperature. And this is the finished product. So you can see that the surface of the cookie has a lot going on. What I really like about these cookies is that each cookie is completely different. So some of them have more papaya, some have more pineapple, some have a lot more chocolate, some have a little bit less. So there's really something for everyone. And I am really excited to dig into it. So let's go ahead and break this open. So the cookie seems pretty tender. There's a good amount of moisture in here. Got some nut, some chocolate, a little bit of chewiness. The sesame seeds on the outside are super crispy. The heat is very kind of low. It's just kind of like hitting the middle of my tongue. It doesn't feel spicy. It's kind of like a smoky, kind of subtle heat. I feel like this might build as I continue eating. So I'll just have to keep eating the cookie, I guess. The little burst of sweetness from the dried fruit is kind of a nice break from the spiciness of the cookie. And then that really dark chocolate, it's not fully set. It's kind of a little bit puddly still, but still holding its shape. So that's kind of a nice texture in my mouth as well. So overall, I am really happy with this cookie. I really like the flavor combinations here, the sweet, spicy, savory. It's got a lot going on. Textures, there's kind of everything. There's chewy, crispy, crunchy, gooey. It's literally everything going on in this cookie, and it just comes together so well. I also really like that this one is just ready to go the second it comes out of the oven. So it was a little bit more work to put the dough together because there's a lot of stuff going into it, but it's really refreshing to pull something out and just be done with it. There's no faffing about with decorations and glazes and all of that. So I really do appreciate that. The spice level on this cookie is exactly right for me. I do generally like my food a little bit more to the kind of medium to spicy end. So if you're sensitive to heat, you might want to dial the ancho powder back just a bit. But overall, super happy with this cookie, and I would definitely recommend that you give this one a try. I really hope you enjoyed this week's video. If you did, please be sure to give me a big thumbs up and click subscribe. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next week.